Hello, and welcome to today's session. We're going to be chatting about media and how to engage with the media and sharing some tips and tricks on how best to get your message across when you get invited to do a media interview. I think very often when people hear that there's a media interview opportunity, they just shut down and then don't want to engage with a journalist. But I think that's a very big opportunity that's missed. I've also picked up in the last week or so with conversations that I've had that many people aren't prepared for the media. They haven't had media training. They're not too sure how to engage with the media. And we're going to go through different scenarios during this video. I'd love also for you to share some of your tips of what you've learned and what you've experienced so that we can all share and learn together. So, to start off with, don't you just love this quote by George Dressel? The human brain starts working the moment you are born and never stops until you stand up to speak in public. But that goes for when you have to do a media interview as well. When you are either called by a journalist or if you have to go into the television studio, it is quite nerve wracking. But I think being able to deal with your nerves and understand how it all works and to be prepared will definitely help you when you do need to engage with the media. I also love this one by Mark Twain. There are two types of speakers, those who get nervous and those who are liars. So, as one of the key things when it comes to the media is fail to prepare, prepare to fail. And one of the key things that before engaging with the media right at the beginning is to have a plan in place, have a communications plan and strategy, have a communications policy in place so that you know exactly what needs to be said, how it needs to be said, the channels of communication to follow. That's really, really key. You don't want to only start meeting the journalists and media when there's a crisis or to start putting up a strategy and a plan in place, falling all over the place to see who's going to be speaking to a journalist when there's a crisis. Plan for managing the media. You also don't want the newest person, a receptionist, a temp, somebody that's helping out for the day, to speak on behalf of your organization. So make sure that you do have a policy in place when it comes to your communication, when it comes to your media. And make sure everybody in your organization is familiar with this policy as well. Invest in media training. So it's wonderful that you are joining this session, and it's definitely a step in the right direction. But it is highly, highly recommended that the board, the executives, the leadership, in fact, everybody in your organization has some kind of media training so that the spokesperson is confident when it comes to speaking to the media, as well as in case that spokesperson or the leader isn't available for whatever reason, that the next person in line is aware of the fact that they are in line and knows how to deal with a specific journalist question or media interview request that comes their way. And as I mentioned earlier, it's important for the whole company to understand what the strategy, what the plan, what the protocol is, so that you don't have the whole organization speaking on behalf of the organization to the media. You want to have a unified voice. You want to be prepared for the media interviews, and you want to make sure that you maximize every single media opportunity. So investing in media training would really be a very wise decision, because during that session, very often, and the organizations and companies that provide the media training have a practical session where they actually bring in a camera and they put you through through different interview scenarios, difficult ones, easy ones, keep you on your toes, because you actually never know what type of questions you are going to get during an interview. So it is best to have a role play and then to actually watch yourself on the camera So what they'll do is they'll record the interview and then play it back, and you might actually pick up some cues that you didn't realize that you did, or nervous twitches, so that you are aware and that you make the mistakes during the training, so that you also have a professional to guide you through the interview, so that you make the mistakes during the training instead of a live interview. And then practicing, that's really, really key as well. If you do know that you are going to have a media interview, make sure that you jot down the key messages that you want to get through that interview, that you do touch on the key aspects of what to communicate. The journalist might not be asking you those specific questions, but it is a good idea to practice in front of the mirror. It's a good idea to practice in front of your family, because they're going to be really honest with you in terms of whether or not you're getting your message across. And also, just before I forget, what's really important, what a journalist once shared with me, is do the mum test. So if you are preparing your questions, if you were to explain a specific concept to your mum, would she understand it? So make sure that you are explaining it in a way that other people would be able to understand the concepts. So having a look, what makes the news? Because I think very often when companies want to invest in a PR agency, in some media liaison, what media cover and what the company would like the media to cover are quite different. We've seen so many times over the years, we've managed the media for many companies. When a company moves, they think that's big news, which it is in the life of the company, but the news really don't care about that. There's different angles and things to look at, and I think understanding this will also guide you in terms of what will make the news, what will help you to get coverage, but also to be aware of what not to do. So celebrities, they get a lot of media coverage, as we know. The human element, this is a very key one, but it's also important to use it very well. You don't want to focus on the human element, the social work that you do just to get media for it. It has to be done in the right, sensitive, empathetic way. Writing or bringing across the human element does make the story a lot more interesting as well. Instead of just having loads of facts on a specific topic, bring in that human element of where you're telling a story. So, for example, I like using this example where in the past many organizations would donate a check, and they would then send a photo of the group of executives with the large check in front of the school or in front of a hospital, and send that through to the local paper and think that that's sufficient, and they feel great about themselves and they've got some media coverage. But that's incredibly boring. I think that's a horrible photo, and that's really horrific media to try and pursue to get that. What would make a much better impact and something for you to consider is, let's say you are donating money to a local creche. How about profiling the principal, or speaking to a teacher that's been there for a number of years? Or if it's at a hospital, speaking in the life of the nurse, how is this money going to be impacting the ward, how is it impacting the life? That's a lot more interesting. And through that story, you actually might get more people to sponsor or donate or invest in that specific project. So to be careful how you relate that human element story. Then, what else makes news? Management challenges. I mean, corruption. We've all seen that. We see that often, but that's going to get you media. So what's important is don't lie. Tell the truth. The more you lie, the more media coverage you are going to get, and the wrong type of media coverage you're going to be getting. So trends and statistics are also a good way to get some media coverage. But what's important is make sure that they are statistically correct, that it's fact checked. There's so much fake news out there. But what's also important with trends and statistics is Don't give too many stats and too many statistics, because that can get incredibly boring and people are just going to zone out. They're not going to finish reading the article. They're not going to listen to the interview. But look at three, maybe one really massive statistic, but then also put it into context. If you're speaking about a ton of something, a ton seems quite obscure, but if you're saying the size of a small vehicle, people can put that into a picture. So keep that in mind. Exclusives. So if there's something specifically happening with in your organization, it's very unlikely that if you give a company or a media house exclusivity to a story, they will run with it. It's more likely that they will run with that specific story. Scandal. People love reading about a scandal. You don't want to be on the wrong side of that scandal, so just keep in mind that that is what makes the news. Obviously, disasters. Currently, we're seeing the massive disaster that COVID-19 is having globally. The pandemic is something that we never imagined to reach the magnitude it has. And that is obviously getting a lot of media coverage at the moment. And I think that's also why I've been having so many conversations lately around crisis and media, because there's this massive attention on it at the moment. And then photographs. I do want to actually spend a little bit of time on photographs and the importance of taking good photos. Especially when it's for online, for print, obviously, having a good photo is so important. As they say, a photo it just tells the story. It is so important to have a good camera, but I think we're fortunate in this day and age. Most of our phones can actually take good camera, very good cameras on them to take good photos. And to make sure when you send through a photo to a journalist that it is at least a meg big, because otherwise it prints pixelated, it doesn't print very well. And it tells a story. Make sure that your photos tell a story. So, for example, this was the same event, and it was a tree planting event. Now, if you have a look at the photo on the left and the photo on the right, the photo on they both are giving the same message, but I think you'll agree with me. The message on the left, on the right-hand side, on the right-hand side, where they're actually planting the tree, you can see the youngsters being engaged and seeing how this tree is being planted. This one, where they're just speaking, we're seeing the back of a person's head, isn't as exciting. The same with telling a story. Shame this poor teacher. She was there to have this massive snake. It was a big drive to create awareness about looking after animals and reptiles. And taking a good photo, a shame. There was so much fear with this poor teacher, but it got printed in the local paper. So it is having your camera ready, taking good photos, let it tell a story. Where possible, bring in some branding. But that also brings me to the next item. When there are photo opportunities, just to touch on when there are children involved, it's a very, very sensitive area. You need to make sure that you have permission from the parents and guardians before you take any photos of children that you send through to the media. Try and hide their faces. So, for example, in this library that was launched, we took photos from behind, still showing that the kids are enjoying the library and reading. Here, showing that they have here. This was a beach cleanup. This photo on the left-hand side. And where possible, try and have some branding. Have caps and T-shirts. Obviously, that is impacted by the budget. But when you can take a group photo, it just is wonderful. And with this photo as well, group photos of children are generally okay. Again, make sure that you get appropriate permissions from everybody. Have it as in this photo, it shows you exactly the location. It was a beach cleanup. So have some branding in place as well.